Why can't we apply to economic science Popper's demarcation criterion, according to which a scientific hypothesis is one that can be falsified through empirical testing? We discussed this the other day. There are 4 essential reasons, and I examine them in detail in the same order in my article Método y crisis en la ciencia económica. Let's consider the first reason. Do you recall what the object of study in economics is? Is it things or ideas? Ideas. The object of research in economics is ideas. The ideas the other human beings we study have about what they desire and what means they believe available to them to achieve what they desire, their ends. And these are not things we can observe directly in the outside world. Indeed, ideas cannot be directly observed in the outside world. Look around you. Do you see any ideas? Come on, let's do a lab experiment. Mark, look around you. Do you see any ideas? Let's all look. Do we see ideas? No. No one sees ideas. Ideas cannot be observed. They are not part of an indisputable outside reality that can be objectively studied in a laboratory. Positivists insist that history can be the laboratory, but they fall into a vicious circle because it's not possible to practice history without a prior theory. Ideas can't be observed. Ideas can only be interpreted, and to interpret them, we need a prior set of theoretical weapons, a prior theory. The theory must be formulated by methodological procedures other than empirical testing, or consulting reality to see if it confirms the theory or not. A chemical compound is a cosmetic. A piece of paper is money. A cosmetic is not a cosmetic due to qualities observable from the outside, but due to the use people believe the chemical compound has, that they can apply it at night to moisturize their skin and be more attractive. Also, they believe someone will accept that piece of paper as a medium of exchange, and they believe. When you hear me say the word rosa in Spanish, rose in English, you immediately know what I'm talking about. The idea occurs to you that I'm referring to a flower. Incidentally, a very lovely flower that smells really nice, but has thorns. If you didn't have that prior conceptual framework, if you had never heard a word of Spanish, for example, if Mark hadn't been born in Spain and had never studied Spanish, and he heard the word rosa, he wouldn't know what I'm referring to. But notice, all that is observable is what we hear, rosa. But it is a term, because we immediately identify what it conveys. If we didn't speak Spanish, we would think, how strange, rosa, what is this? What does it mean? However, we do have an idea, and we immediately connect the sound with the flower. We have an idea, and the idea is the theory. I have the theory, the idea of a rose in my head, and I connect it with the term. So, dear students, the first reason we cannot apply to economics the method of empirical testing is our old friend, the fact that economics does not focus on things. It does not focus on tons of oil or millions of physical euros. Economics focuses on ideas. It is a science that focuses on spiritual realities. In economics, restrictions are not imposed by physical limitations from the outside world. One revolutionary idea is enough to do away with all those restrictions. The discovery of a carburetor that is twice as energy efficient is equivalent to the discovery of twice the supply of oil. At the end of the 19th century, there was a great outcry. The supply of coal is going to run out. What's going to happen? The world will come to a standstill. Chaos! Industry won't be able to... And what came of all that? Well, nothing. The internal combustion engine was discovered, and oil as well, as a new energy source. Not too many years ago, the Club of Rome was declaring, "We are in the worst of worlds. Resources are going to run out. Nickel and copper have already disappeared, and agricultural capacity has been exhausted. People are going to go hungry." The Club of Rome members would get together and say, "We need the UN. We need governments. We need to prepare ourselves. We need intervention." There was an Austrian economist, Julian Simon, may he rest in peace, who said, "Oh yeah? Well, you're totally wrong, because economics is not about all those things that frighten you. restrictions from the outside world. Economics is about ideas. I'll make you a bet. I'll bet you that 20 years from now, the prices of all those resources you are so worried about will have dropped in real terms by a very large percentage, and furthermore, that the supply will increase, that the shortages you mention will not occur, and that instead there will be plenty. Everybody laughed at him, but he made the bet. 20 years passed, and he won. Everything people thought would be exhausted or limited was not in the end, and the world kept growing, thanks to entrepreneurial creativity, for it is ideas that drive the world. Economic science is about ideas, and the object of research in our discipline consists of ideas and entrepreneurial creativity. The second reason the method of empirical testing is not applicable to economics is that human action phenomena, which are what we study, are complex phenomena. They are complex phenomena that cannot be isolated. They do not lend themselves to laboratory experiments. In other words, in a laboratory, in physics or chemistry, you can freeze all the factors that influence a phenomenon, except one factor, and then you can see precisely what influence it has. In contrast, in economics, the laws we formulate are laws of tendency, or as we economists call them, ceteris paribus laws. Note that ceteris paribus is a Latin phrase which means other things being equal. So, laws in economics are expressed as follows. Other things being equal, ceteris paribus, an increase in demand tends to drive up the price. Well, what I'm saying is that in the real world, no one is able to observe anything ceteris paribus. In history, we can't say ceteris paribus, or in other words, hey, one moment, everybody out there in the world, freeze. And everybody suddenly stops dead. Nobody think anything new. Nobody discover anything. Nobody change their tastes. No discovering any new sources of supply. No implementing any new innovations. Everybody just stand still. And humanity comes to a halt. Except, shh, everybody freeze. Except, let there be an increase in the supply of potatoes in Ireland, and let's see what happens to the price. It's not possible to conduct laboratory experiments in the world. There is no phenomenon we can observe ceteris paribus in the world. Out in the world we cannot isolate just two factors and leave the rest frozen and unalterable. This means that the phenomena we study are complex phenomena. The phenomena that comprise history are complex phenomena that cannot be isolated. They do not lend themselves to laboratory experiments. In the real world, no scientist has ever been able to observe anything ceteris paribus, other things being equal, nor can any scientist do so now, nor will any ever be able to do so in the future. So, we cannot test ceteris paribus laws in a constantly changing world, in a world we cannot freeze. This is the second reason the method of empirical testing is not applicable to economics. You cannot logically derive a law that states that other things being equal, an increase in demand tends to drive up the price, and then say, okay, let's empirically test this law in the real world. To test that law in the real world, you would have to be able to freeze the whole world, every human being, and make sure nobody discovered anything nor created anything new. And you would have to isolate only two phenomena and then observe whether an increase in demand was followed by an increase in price. Such a thing is not possible. I repeat, the research process in economics is the other way round. We begin by deducing a law in purely theoretical terms, and then, with that law, we can dare to bring order to the huge mass of apparently unconnected events that make up history. And we can begin to grasp in historical terms a little of the world around us. Of course, from the time we're small, human beings have to interpret history, because we're lost if we don't. And as children, we didn't come to economics class, nor had we read Human Action, nor Professor Huerta de Soto's books, nor had we taken the course. We shouldn't be surprised by the amount of nonsense we hear. As I was saying before, the great majority of our notions about what happens in the world are false, because the interpretive framework we either explicitly or implicitly use is, for the most part, very poor or erroneous. The third reason empirical testing is impossible in economics is that there are no constants in our discipline. Everything is variable. Everything is continually changing. There are no functional relationships. We cannot take measurements. If there is no constancy, we cannot measure anything. Hey, what's the professor saying? That we don't measure anything in economics? We measure things all day long. We talk about millions of euros and the GDP increasing and the consumer price index. We measure things all day long. Don't be fooled. Those measurements have nothing to do with measurements in the world of physics. A meter is 1/10,000,000th of the Earth's quadrant, and in Paris there's a prototype made of a special metal, and that is objective. We know how cold, according to the Fahrenheit or Celsius scale, a temperature of 0 degrees is, or 1 or 2 degrees, or -2 degrees. That is objective for everybody. In economics, there are no measuring rods, because there is no constancy. Everything is in a state of flux. The euro is a monetary unit with a purchasing power that changes continually, from one day to the next, from 1 hour to the next. It's as if the measuring rod or the ruler were sometimes longer and sometimes shorter. In economics, all measurements are very rough compared to those in the world of physics, and they are always subject to the historical interpretation of the entrepreneur who uses them. The notion that a balance sheet is objective and conclusive is mistaken. A balance sheet consists mainly of interpretations, which result from other interpretations and decisions that for practical purposes are very useful, and we will see what role they play in economic calculation, but they involve none of the certainty of the measurements obtained in the natural sciences. I repeat, in economics everything is variable. Everything is in a state of flux all the time. There are no constants. Therefore, it's impossible to objectively consult the real world to try to test theories. The fourth and last reason, which I also state in the article, is reflected in the contradiction the vast majority of my colleagues who are mathematical equilibrium economists fall into, and this is almost a joke. They develop mathematical equilibrium models in which the world does not change. Those are the only models that can be expressed mathematically, and then they try to test those models in the real world, which is in a permanent state of disequilibrium. That is a genuine outrage. So, what conclusion do we reach? We conclude that we cannot apply the method of empirical testing to economic science, and we must conduct our research based on the other methodological procedures we discussed when we covered the section titled The Method of Political Economy. 2 economics-related disciplines are particularly harmful. One is statistics, and the other is mathematics. Let's talk about statistics and mathematics. To begin with, the term statistics derives etymologically from where? From state.
¿Por qué la disciplina de la estadística tiene un nombre que procede de Estado?
Why does the discipline of statistics have a name that derives from state? Do you know why Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem? Why was it? Because a Roman emperor named Caesar Augustus decided to conduct a statistical census. In short, to register the empire's subjects for tax purposes. Each person included in the census would pay a certain amount of taxes, and the emperor wanted to know how much he could squeeze out of people. Think about that. That's where the first statistics came from.
Siempre sospechen de la estadística.
Always be suspicious of statistics. According to Lenin, those who wish to regulate society from above with coercive commands, socialists, should organize the economy like the postal system. He also said that in a socialist economy, in the communist ideal, the most important agency would be the National Institute of Statistics. Well, that should frighten us. A libertarian should strive to put an end to statistical services. Statistics are just fine if companies use them, but if they fall into the hands of the state, they won't be put to good use. Remember the birth of Jesus Christ. Such a search for information does not bode well. The authorities want it so they can try to direct our lives and tax us more, etc. This has been an aside to our main discussion. I just want you to see that the name of the discipline sprang from coercive state intervention. At best, statistics can be considered a somewhat valuable auxiliary method of historical research. It's a method for practicing history and applied economics. In fact, many historians use statistics of varying quantities and complexity concerning phenomena they analyze, price statistics, etc. But you must remember that the discipline of statistics in no way enables us to obtain theoretical knowledge, and therefore it is not useful in theoretical economics. Why? The first reason is that statistics only permits us to gather information from the past. No one has ever prepared statistics on information from the future. Such figures always concern what happened in the distant past, the fairly distant past, the recent past, or the immediate past.
Dense cuenta que muchas veces los telediarios
Notice that many times news programs on TV are fueled by news items that center around statistics. When there's no news to report and there's half an hour to fill, what do? Well, a statistical study. You probably haven't been on television with a news anchor before. Remember TV programs with Jesús Alvarez, with Matthias Prats? At times the situation is desperate. They have to talk for half an hour and there's no news. Haven't you ever noticed that no matter how much news there is, a news program always lasts half an hour? How is that possible if news is unpredictable? Well, if there's no news, they invent some. How is news invented? Well, it's very simple. I need a statistical study, a survey. They pay for it, and immediately they have some news. 65% of Spanish people make love twice a week. And then, with the comments on that, they ask people on the street, what's your opinion? And people think, I'm going to be on TV. That news is all made up. And besides, does it prove any information? Well, there would be lots of theories, wouldn't there? Theories about whether people had told the truth or not, how the questions had been phrased, what the margin of error was. Let's assume the survey was done well, that there was no bias, etc. In any case, we should be aware that the value of such information is purely archaeological. It has to do with the past. Its having been true yesterday tells us nothing about what will happen today, much less tomorrow. In fact, the study itself influences people's behavior, because lots of people say, damn, 65% of people are doing it twice a week. And when I think back, it's been a month since I've done anything, and then everyone climbs into bed, which means the study alters everyone's behavior. Am I right or not? Notice how the statistic and the survey themselves influence future behavior and make it quite different from past behavior. What can we conclude? At best, and assuming they are done well, statistical studies only tell us about past phenomena that will not necessarily recur in the future. The second reason the discipline of statistics is not useful in theoretical economics is that it only provides us with information about isolated elements of the formal structures of market processes. But it doesn't provide us with information about the economic laws which govern those processes. There are many statistically measurable concepts that have no economic meaning, and vice versa. The concepts which truly have economic meaning cannot be statistically measured.
Por ejemplo, Producto Interior Bruto, que usted lo mide. ¿Tiene algún sentido Producto Interior Bruto? Lo veremos en un momento. No tiene ningún sentido.
For example, the gross domestic product you measure. Does the gross domestic product have any meaning? We'll discuss this when the time comes. It's meaningless. It's not an objective measure. It's supposed to reflect the value at market prices of the goods and services produced in a country. But what if certain goods and services conflict with others? When statistics were compiled during the era of real socialism, the former Soviet Union appeared as the world's largest producer of iron, of steel, of cement, of potatoes, of tractors. The thing is, if we measure in physical terms the tons produced, it was the world's largest producer. What might we conclude? That it was a very rich country, but it was a poor third world country. It was the world's largest producer of tractors, but the tractors lay rusting on vast plots of land somewhere. It was the world's largest producer of potatoes, but the potatoes were never harvested. They never reached the markets and instead lay rotting in the Ukraine. The cement was used to build factories nobody wanted. Then, when the statistics were added up, the former Soviet Union appeared to be the world's leading country, the richest country in the world, but it was a third world country. Statistics do not reflect the qualitative, subtle factors of entrepreneurial creativity and coordination, and these make the difference between a prosperous country and a poor country. That's why the Berlin Wall crumbled. Real socialism collapsed. And in spite of the differences, the same is true of the statistics applied today in market economies in every area in which the state intervenes. So these apparently objective measures, GDP, national income, etc., are largely meaningless, theoretically speaking. They make no theoretical sense. Though we can measure such quantities, they provide us with no theoretical knowledge. But people say, hey look, the GDP rose by 2%. That's great! We're richer! We're very happy! Zapatero is surely a good manager. Or, the GDP fell by over 1%. Oh no, what a disaster! Things are not going at all well, etc. A little over 1%. But what does that mean? Statistics only reflect past events. They provide us with no information about the workings of the processes of social cooperation, which lie at the heart of science, of economic theory. Mathematics is a highly formalized language, which has emerged in human history to meet the demands of mainly two disciplines: logic and physics. The world of the natural sciences, the world of physics, and the world of logic are characterized by the constancy of phenomena. In addition to constancy, the world of logic is characterized by the immediacy of conclusions. The result is implicit at the start, and the laws of logic are applied instantly. To put it another way, logic lacks a time factor. We start from premises and reach conclusions. We construct a syllogism. There is no time. However, in economics, entrepreneurial creativity and the subjective concept of time play the leading roles. A branch of mathematics with a language that can be used in the areas of subjective time and human creativity has never been discovered. We've already seen that when mathematical economists say their models include time, these economists are making a caricature of time. They are spatializing time. You remember that we talked about analog time versus subjective time, right? We saw that mathematical economists simply add subscripts to their variables and say, now we've incorporated time, t1, t2, t3. But that's not right. That is simply assuming that the future is given, that it is to come, and that time is merely movement, the fourth dimension. This has nothing to do with the concept we have of time in economics. Thus, in economics, we can't use math, because it acts as a straitjacket and incorporates a framework of conceptual categories that is too simple to aid us in developing our discipline. Do you remember that we talked about the hierarchical classification of orders? We said that an order can account for simpler orders than itself, but it can't account for itself nor for orders higher than itself. Well, despite its apparent complexity, mathematics is relatively simple, and it can't account for orders as complex as economics, which includes human creativity and the subjective passage of time. Sometimes it is said that mathematical language is more precise than verbal language. That's not true. Verbal language is just as precise as the most complex mathematical language. Furthermore, verbal language is much more flexible, and it encompasses entrepreneurial creativity and the subjective passage of time. Why? Because verbal language has evolved over generations and generations of human beings, each of whom has developed his or her creativity. By writing a screenplay, for example. That is, people have used verbal language to express precisely those realities that mathematics cannot account for: entrepreneurial creativity and the subjective passage of time. Notice all the subtleties of verbal language that cannot be incorporated into mathematical language. All that can be suggested with a word, even with a look. How are you going to mathematize that? In any case, verbal language is just as precise as mathematical language and also far more general and flexible. On top of that, the intermediate steps in mathematics have no meaning, apart from a strictly operational one. What are the intermediate steps in mathematics? We all learned them in elementary and high school, didn't we? What is added on the right moves to the left when we subtract it. What is multiplied in one place moves to another when we divide. We find a common factor. These are mechanical operations, but they have no meaning beyond the operational one. So, what's the problem with using mathematics in economics? We start from a premise, and then we carry out the intermediate operations according to the rules of mathematics, and we get a result. If we expect that result to occur in real life because the intermediate operations are correct, then we are committing a very grave error. The intermediate operations may be meaningless in terms of economic theory. We'll see this is true when we study the Keynesian multiplier. The intermediate steps in mathematics make no sense in terms of economic theory. They only make sense in terms of the automatism of mathematical operations, and these may be completely removed from the reality of what happens in economics. Furthermore, mathematics leads to the error of circular reasoning. Functions are used. Y equals f of x. Functions can also be expressed in inverse form if the projection is bijective. X equals g of y. Take note, sometimes mathematical economists say price is a function of quantity, that it's supply and demand, and other times they say instead that the quantity supplied and demanded is a function of the price. So which is it? They say, if the price goes up, you demand less. Ah, okay, I understand you then. What I demand depends on the price. There's a certain logic to that. But what determines the price? The price is determined by what you demand. So which is it then? Does the price determine the quantity demanded, or does the quantity demanded determine the price? Mathematical economists don't know. They use functional language of mutual determination. We know that everything is genetic causal, that the origin of all economic phenomena is human action. I value certain ends. I seek out means. My demand of the means to help me achieve my ends is key to my valuation of my ends. When I demand the means, I end up closing a deal. And last in the chain of events comes discussion of the price. Therefore, the quantities demanded, which follow from my subjective valuations, are what determine the price, and not the other way round. I know the origin of phenomena. Mathematical economists do not. They fall into circular reasoning because they use functions. And that is not to mention the absurdity of using infinitesimal calculus, that is, differential calculus. Infinitesimal concepts make no sense in economics, because in economics we always work in what mathematicians call discrete terms. An infinitesimal change does not provoke any action. What provokes action is a significant change which a human being values. Well, for this, I'll do it. For that, I won't. But how about for a tiny infinitesimal amount more? This reminds me of an old joke. A man asks a woman, "Mum, would you sleep with me for €1,000,000? The woman answers, "Well, I suppose so." Then the man asks her, "And would you sleep with me for €1?" She replies, "Sir, what kind of woman do you think I am?" "We've already established that," he says. "Now we're simply haggling about the price."
Bien, este famoso chiste.
Well, this old joke shows that all human actions are discrete.
Discretas, es decir,
In other words, would you sleep with me for €1? No. Would you do it for 1.000000001 euros? Listen, you're talking nonsense. Either you raise the sum significantly, so I can tell the difference, or there's no deal. We'll talk about this again when we study the theory of prices as illustrated by the script of Pretty Woman. Infinitesimal mathematics, based on infinitesimal increases, makes differential calculus possible. The application of this math to economic science makes no sense. Economic science deals with real human actions, and real human actions, our acts of deciding to go this way or that, depend on our seeing a difference that is significant to us. We can't apply differential calculus. Econometrics is a discipline developed by many of my colleagues. It resulted from the fusion of statistics and mathematics and their application to the field and discipline of economic science. As is logical, econometrics is doubly flawed, because it combines all the errors of statistics with all those of mathematics. The slogan of the Econometric Society is, "Science is measurement." What a pompous slogan. You can't imagine the amount of effort and the hopes that were placed in econometrics, especially throughout the 20th century. All the hopes that were placed in econometrics have collapsed like a house of cards. I repeat, econometrics is based on the use of mathematics and statistics in an attempt to scientifically advance economic theory. Such an attempt is methodologically impossible, and therefore it has failed miserably. Now I'd like to make a few comments about method and polylogism. However, before I begin, we need to talk a little about rationalism from the perspective of Mises. That ugly word rationalism derives etymologically from the term reason. In fact, human reason is the most important tool we have for getting along in life. Does anyone doubt that? I don't know if any of you has ever had a family member, maybe an elderly person with Alzheimer's disease. When we lose our intellectual abilities, we become totally helpless. We can no longer cope with the world around us. We become totally dependent. This illustrates better than anything else that the most important tool we have for getting along in life is human reason. Now, our recognition of that fact should not mean we commit the error of deifying human reason. Regrettably, many in the field of science have done just that. In fact, we could say there are two types of rationalism. We will call the first type false, erroneous, exaggerated, unscientific rationalism. What does this rationalism consist of? It consists of the assumption that the human mind is much more powerful than it really is. It consists of the belief that through reason, man can come to know much more than human reason could ever tell him in reality. Well, this exaggerated, erroneous rationalism provides the foundation for the scientificism, the scientism, the positivism we have discussed in previous classes. In the field of the social sciences, this rationalism has fueled social engineering, econometrics. In the field of politics, it is the basis for socialism, for communism, for all interventionism. Through the coercive power of the state, adherents of such rationalism aim to create a utopia, a heaven or nirvana on earth. They assume all we need to do is get rid of bad leaders and choose some good and wise ones, because the human mind is capable of organizing a much better world. Erroneous, exaggerated, false rationalism emerged. It exploded with the French Revolution. The origin of this rationalism lies in the French Revolution of 1789. Religious images were destroyed in churches and replaced with the goddess of reason. Revolutionaries deified reason, and even tried to rename the months.
Recuerden el 18 Brumario de Napoleón Bonaparte, el título.
Remember the coup of 18 Brumaire staged by Napoleon Bonaparte, who would later become emperor. People who hold exaggerated rationalist views and deify human reason believe that human institutions are imperfect because they have evolved, and that they can be improved from above, that they can be redesigned, that they can be deliberately modified at the whim of human beings. In the field of law, exaggerated rationalism takes the form of legal positivism, and its main representative was Hans Kelsen. Legal positivists recognize as law all decisions of a legislative body under popular sovereignty. The context of those decisions does not matter. What if the decision is to kill, to commit genocide and gas 6 million Jews? Well, that's the law, the power of the state, exerted from above on those below. In economics, exaggerated rationalism is expressed in a multitude of textbooks. For instance, do you remember Samuelson's book? If you pick up Samuelson's introductory textbook entitled Economics, there you will read that economics is a science that must respond to 3 questions. What to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. How absurd! Economic agents never consider such questions, nor can they consider them. Notice that the author is presenting the viewpoint of an omniscient, superior being who would look down at all of us as if we were ants and say, "Hey, one moment, what are you going to produce? How are you going to produce it? And for whom?" No one in society asks himself such a question. No one bases her actions on what society as a whole is going to produce. Instead, millions and millions of human beings are interacting with each other and trying to get on in life. One person is trying to produce something to sell to someone else, to gain a profit, to achieve a certain end or objective. The mere act of approaching the economic problem as such authors do is evidence of the scientificist conceit of those with exaggerated rationalist views, people drunk on their own importance. Indeed, exaggerated rationalism is extremely dangerous. All the social conflicts, all the wars, and all the genocide you can imagine stem from exaggerated rationalism, from the attempt to make a better world from above and impose it on the rest of society by force. In contrast with exaggerated rationalism, let's consider another rationalism, which we will call true or correct rationalism. This is a humble rationalism. Above all, its adherents acknowledge the actual limits of human reason, and they condemn scientificism, scientism, positivism. Adherents of this rationalism recognize that human beings benefit from and rely on innumerable institutions, which have not been deliberately created, but instead have spontaneously emerged. For example, the Spanish language, Castilian Spanish. No one deliberately created it, it has evolved. The same is true of law, morality, etc. Such rationalists understand that it is not possible to improve these institutions from above without destroying them. They conceive economics as precisely the scientific study of those spontaneous processes of social cooperation. Such rationalism is contrary to Kelson's positivism. The school that is contrary to Kelson's positivism is the school of Savigny, who saw the law as an evolutionary process which emerges over many generations. Savigny was a brilliant German jurisconsult, a specialist in Roman law. He had a debate about codification with a Cartesian rationalist of French descent, Thibaut. Thibaut said the law was simply what was in the Napoleonic Code, and Savigny said, no, the law came before the code and evolves based on custom. The law was not codified until very late in history. The great Roman jurisconsult was simply discovering the law that already existed and had evolved in society. Rather late in the empire, an emperor named Justinian feared the law would be lost. He said, put it in writing, and what is now known as the Corpus Iuris Civilis was compiled. But this happened rather late. The famous Napoleonic Code, Napoleon supposedly dictated. Article number 1, Article number 2. What he actually did was copy Roman law and adapt it a little to the France of his era. We are humble rationalists, rationalists who acknowledge the limits of reason. City planning provides another illustration. Who's been to Paris? Raise your hand. Okay. Who's been to London? Raise your hand. What difference is there between the two cities? France is lost. Poor French people. They're lost. Nothing but misfortunes ever come out of France. France is immersed in the exaggerated rationalism of the French Revolution, la grandeur de la France. And René Descartes, Cartesian rationalism. What's Paris like? It looks like it was drawn with a pen and ruler. The Champs-Élysées, the Place de la Concorde, Napoleon. Everything's perfectly straight, like a grid. And what's London like? London is spontaneous. You can be walking through the middle of London and suddenly there's a curved street, and nobody knows why it's curved. And some streets go like this, and others go like that. It's a spontaneous order that appears chaotic. One city reflects the tradition of exaggerated rationalism, while the other reflects that of humble evolutionary rationalism. Compare them for yourselves. And where does Spain fit in all of this? Which has had the stronger influence in Spain? Well, since the Bourbons, France. Let's clarify that. Not all the French are equally misguided. There have been a few French people who should be excluded from that description, humble, true rationalists. For example, Charles de Secondat, Baron de Montesquieu. His most important works are The Spirit of the Laws and The Persian Letters. He was a humble rationalist who condemned the exaggerated rationalism of his own country. There have also been British people who have subscribed to a brutal, exaggerated rationalism. For example, Jeremy Bentham. He was a lunatic. Among other things, he requested that after he died, his body be mummified. And you can see the guy sitting there on display at a university. It's a sight to see. Do you know what the panopticon is? Well, this man invented Big Brother. It's a prison with glass walls. Bentham claimed that approach was ideal for society. To be able to see everything everyone is doing at any moment, to observe it all from above, Big Brother, and to exert control as well, to calculate costs, profits, utility. All social decisions will be made to maximize utility, as if an authority could know from the outside what would result in utility and what would result in costs. Bentham was an extremely dangerous social engineer. He introduced the virus of the most disturbing exaggerated rationalism, of social engineering, into the English-speaking world. He was a very dangerous man, Jeremy Bentham. Though I have contrasted the Anglo-Saxon tradition of humble rationalism with the French tradition of exaggerated rationalism, I have done so in broad strokes. There are theorists who defy this division, and though they are French, they belong to the correct camp. Or, though they are English, they belong to the erroneous. One of the clearest manifestations of the attack on reason, though humble reason, is polylogism. In accordance with Mises, we will define polylogism as the doctrine that the logical structure of the human mind varies. There are two different types or aspects of polylogism. On the one hand, there is Marxian polylogism, and on the other hand, there is Nazi polylogism. From the Marxian point of view, the logical structure of the human mind varies depending on the social class of the human being in question. So, the logical structure of the mind of a member of the bourgeoisie would be nothing like the logical structure of the mind of a worker or a proletarian. Do you know where the word proletarian comes from? Proles means offspring in Latin. So, why were poor people called proletarians? Because all they had were their children. They were practically naked, but they had their children. In the view of adherents of Nazi polylogism, the logical structure of the human mind does not vary with one's social class, but with one's race. So, the minds of members of the Aryan race would have a certain logical structure, and it would be different from the logical structure of the minds of black people, or Asians, etc. Polylogism means many logics. Why does polylogism make no sense? I'll give you 4 reasons, and we'll consider the 4 arguments Mises offers. Reason number 1. Nowhere do polylogists, neither the scientists who supported Hitler, nor those who supported Marxism in the entire Western world, etc., nowhere do they univocally and scientifically define the concepts of social class and race which would serve to determine different mental structures. Instead, they refer to vague, nebulous concepts. This guy's bourgeois, or this guy's a millionaire. Yes, but when does a person begin to be bourgeois? When does a person stop being a worker? Reason number 2. Even if we admitted, for the sake of argument, that we could define the concepts of social class and race with perfect objectivity, no polylogist, and there are a legion of them even today, though they don't openly admit it, no polylogist ever explains how and when the mind of a human being changes. For example, when a worker, a taxi driver, saves and becomes self-employed, and he continues saving, and he ends up owning a company with 10 taxis and becoming a capitalist, at what point does he lose the spirit and mind of a member of the working class and begin to have the spirit and mind of a bourgeois entrepreneur? Or we could ask the theorists of racial polylogism, what does the mental structure of a mixed-race person consist of? For example, Boris Becker, the embodiment of the Aryan race, 2 meters tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, etc., liked a black girl. If we could only ask a Nazi, what mental structure do their children have? That of the Aryan race or that of the black race? Or do the children have no mental structure? What does the mental structure of mixed-race people consist of? And, reason number 3, please explain to me exactly what the difference is. How does the mental structure of a Jewish person differ from that of an Aryan? How does the mental structure of a capitalist and a Jewish person? Reason number 4, and this is much more unsettling still. Why were many Marxian theorists lucky enough to assimilate the mental structure and the interests of the working class if they themselves belong to the bourgeoisie? Let's remember Mr. Karl Marx. Was Karl Marx a worker? No. You must read the life story of Mr. Marx. It's priceless. He was the typical spoiled rich kid, a privileged child. His father was a wealthy lawyer. The boy's favorite pastime was sleeping with the domestic servants and getting the maids pregnant. Why did this wealthy man, read the biographies of Marx, suddenly find himself imbued with the interests of the working class? But let's not talk about Karl Marx. Let's talk about his partner and patron, Friedrich Engels. Do you know what the profession of Friedrich Engels was? He was a textile manufacturer. Factories with thousands of exploited workers. And he was the one imbued with the spirit of the working class. Can you explain to me by what magical art the embodiment of the bourgeoisie suddenly had a proletarian mental structure? Now let's talk about the other polylogism. How was it that a short, sallow man with a black moustache and Jewish features named Adolf Hitler suddenly turned out to be the embodiment of the Aryan mind? Because honestly, if he'd been a guy 2 meters tall, a Boris Becker, I might understand it a little, but Hitler looked Jewish. What's the explanation? I'm doing a bit of a parody, but it's not such a parody. Because, dear students, we must critique theories based on their own merits. Analyze them with the greatest scientific rigor. And try to refine them again and again, always with the spirit of intellectual humility that accompanies correct rationalism. And it's completely senseless to point to an author's background, as Marxians do. Everything Professor Huerta de Soto says about economics is false. Why? Because he's a bourgeois capitalist, and he's not imbued with the spirit of the working class. Do you see where the trap lies? Or, I pay no attention to anything these people say because they're Jews. If Fleming had been Jewish, what difference would it have made? The fact is, he discovered antibiotics, and I can take them, and they may save my life. We must judge theories and scientific advances on their own merits, without pointing to their author's background and claiming it is tainted by his or her social class or race. Those who hold these misguided ideologies actually seek to immunize them against criticism, to shield them from critical, scientific reasoning by resorting to clumsy polylogist arguments. For ultimately, the mental structure of human beings is one and only one. And there can be only one, because we can't conceive of there being any other. The logical category of yes is one, and the logical category of no is another.
pero es uniforme y
But they are uniform and universal in the minds of all human beings, whether they be black, white, blue, bourgeois or proletarian. It's true that cultural differences sometimes exist. For example, Japan. You must visit Japan. It's a lot of fun. Here in Spain, when a goal is scored, what happens in a soccer stadium? Goal! Everybody's shouting and there's a tremendous commotion, right? And during the play, there's silence. People are waiting to see what will happen. Well, in Japan, it's the other way around. People shout during the play and they're silent when a goal is scored. Here we dress in white to get married and in black to go to a funeral. In other cultures, it's the opposite. People dress in black to get married, and maybe that makes more sense, and in white to go to a funeral. But remember, those are cultural differences. They are not differences in the logical structure of human minds. Because, I repeat, the logical structure of all human minds is one and only one. Because, among other reasons, we can't conceive of there being any other. We can't even conceive of it. Polylogists are very dangerous. Do not get swept up by the ideologies that are out there. Ideologues always seek to attract young people because they're impetuous and want quick results, and they're naive. Now you have more than enough arguments to respond to any polylogist who approaches you.